All right. Well, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Madeline Smith. I am the Director of Higher Education here at the Hunt Institute. It is a pleasure to be here with you all this afternoon for today's webinar entitled SAT Goes Digital, Improving Access and Equity. So it goes without saying that the COVID-19 pandemic changed many aspects of our lives, especially in education. In January of 2022, in an effort to be more equitable and inclusive, College Board announced that the SAT was going digital. So along with this transition to digital, there were several other changes to the test that were made to make the test more accessible overall. So for example, the digital SAT will be shorter and will now take about 2 hours instead of the original 3 that it used to. Students will be able to use their own electronic device, laptop or tablet, or a school issued one. For students who may not have a device to use, they will be issued one for use on test day by College Board. So another change. The content of the exam will include shorter reading passages with a question tied to each, and passages will reflect a broader range of topics. So what's even more exciting is that students will not have to wait long to obtain their test results these days. Students and educators will now get their scores back in days rather than weeks. So furthermore, to reflect the change in students' institutional choice, score reports will now connect test takers to information and resources about local two-year college, workforce training programs, and career options. The SAT will be delivered digitally internationally starting in 2023 and in the US in 2024. The PSAT will be given digitally in 2023. So with us today, we have Aditi Chakrabarti, College Board's Senior Vice President for Learning and Assessment. And then also joining us is Paula Brault, the Associate Principal at Greenville High School, who has been the test coordinator for the SAT suite of assessments and AP testing for 7 years, participating in online testing for 5 of those 7 years. We also have with us today Natalia Cosio, a senior at South County High School in Fairfax, Virginia. During Natalia's junior year, she participated in the SAT's digital pilot. So Aditi, Paula, and Natalia, we appreciate you being here with us today. And before I get started, I do want to remind our audience members that we have a Q&A feature. So please do feel free to drop your questions there as they come up. And we're actually going to start with Aditi. So we'd like to do some opening remarks here. Aditi, thank you so much for being here with us today. Can you tell us a little more about how College Board and SAT kind of came to this decision to make changes to the SAT and what some of those major changes are?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much, Madeline. Thank you to the Hunt Institute for hosting this session, for inviting me to join. I also want to express my appreciation to my co-panelists, Paula and Natalia, for being here to share your experiences. I really look forward to hearing about your experiences as well. That's a treat for me. So yeah, to your question, why the digital SAT? I think I will, let's start with what's happened over the last couple of years. So much has changed about the way that students learn and the way that they test. And, students have been digital natives for years, but now what happens in school and their experience with curriculum and instruction and testing, so much of that has moved to being digital that it simply makes sense that SAT shouldn't be the exception to that. And a digital format for the SAT is simply more relevant to students' lives. And relevancy is a big part of why we've made some of the changes that we've had, and also why we've maintained many of the aspects of the SAT. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the major changes. But first, I want to talk to you about some of the things that have stayed the same, because the digital SAT allows us to do some things we've been eager to do for a while, to create a better, more streamlined experience for students and educators. But what's also really important is that we're able to maintain the value for students and the value for educators and the value for higher ed by doing a lot of the same things we've always done. So here's what's not changing first of all. So the SAT will continue to measure the same skills and knowledge that matter most for college and career as the current paper and pencil SAT. The digital SAT will still be scored on a 1600 scale. It will still track growth over time across the SAT suite, starting from TSAT 8-9 through to the SAT. Students will continue to test the same way they do now in school or in a test center with a proctor, which is really, really important piece of our test security measures as well. The students will still continue to connect to scholarships and the College Board Recognition Program through the SAT. The SAT is a very powerful way of connecting to scholarships. Hundreds of scholarship programs use the SAT suite and will continue to do so. We will still continue to offer free practice through Khan Academy and also through College Board through our digital testing platform, where students will take full-length practice exams, but our official SAT practice program with Khan Academy remains a very important part of how we'll support students. And all of the same accommodations that we currently offer to students who need accommodations will still be available. So those are all of the things that are staying the same, but as I said, we're also excited that we now have the opportunity to create a better experience for students and educators and make some changes we've wanted to do. And Madeline, you named a few of those already, and I'll name a few of them again and get a little bit more into some detail about how this isn't just the paper and pencil SAT on a computer. So first, as you said, this is a substantially shorter test, a little over 2 hours instead of 3 hours, and that's possible because the digital SAT is adaptive. So that's an important change that we've made that really allows for us to shorten the test, which is powerful and a benefit to students and to schools. Students will now be able to test on a laptop, on a tablet. They can test on, they will be testing on our custom-built testing platform, which is called Blue Book. And they'll be able to do so on a device of their own or on a school-issued device. And in fact, they will also be able to obtain a device from us as a loaner device if they're not able to access one on their own. You talked about this as well, that in terms of the test questions, the main place where we see a change is in the reading and writing section, where now instead of 9 to 10 long passages, students will see much shorter reading and writing passages and one question after each. And this change allows us to include a broad range of topics, authors, perspectives that students will get to see on testing day, and still gives us a chance to really assess those important literacy skills. A calculator will now be allowed on the whole math section, which is not true with the current paper and pencil digital SAT or paper and pencil SAT. And also, as you said, we will be able to get scores back much faster. After the first couple of administrations, scores will be returned in shorter and shorter time. And the goal is to get them back to students in days rather than weeks. And last, and something I'm really excited about, is that for the first time, we will be providing career readiness information to students based on their performance on the digital SAT suite. So I know those changes probably sound very exciting to a lot of folks. And so I want to be sure to make sure people know the timeline for all these changes. So we are launching the digital SAT internationally first in next spring of 2023. Then the PSAT assessments in fall of 2023 will be offered digitally. And then we will move to the digital SAT for all US students in the spring of 2024.
Well, wonderful. We appreciate your description of the intentionality behind this design, this redesign, I should call it, and especially with the equity and access pieces. So thank you for highlighting those. And then moving over to Paula, as an education leader, why are you excited for the digital SAT, and what do you see as the biggest benefit for you and your staff?
Thank you, Madeline. I appreciate being here today. It's been a pleasure to be included, and we're really excited to hear from Aditi and Natalia from their perspectives as well. As a test administrator, and I've seen it paper and pencil, I've seen it online, I've done the pilot, it's been sort of all over the place. But I think the biggest thing I can see is those lack of gargantuan boxes arriving at my school and the keeping track of the tests and the answer sheets. And when in New Hampshire, where I came from, we had online SATs already, digital SATs, and for our state mandated test. And the students, they liked it a lot better. They felt like they could be, is much more inclusive test doing it that way. And we could, the accountability was a lot better as well. It also, although anybody might think that it takes up a huge amount of bandwidth, we didn't ever have a bandwidth issue. Even when we did the SAT 9 or the SAT 10, PSAT 10 or 9. So I want people to know that it's easier to use, really easy to set up for your accommodated tests. I felt like accommodated students felt like they were included. They were part of the process, and they didn't have, there was less distinguishing between who was accommodated and who was not. I think my students enjoyed the use of the Chromebook that they're used to using, especially post-pandemic. They got used to using the computer for everything, and then they were back to a paper and pencil test. When we did the pilot for the PSAT NMSQT, and the students were like, whoa, when do we get to do this? And they really like the shorter test, because that one gets even shorter. So I know I have 5 minutes, but I think I really would like to hear from a student who participated in this from their perspective. And I'm happy to answer questions as we go forward. And thank you again for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And I can't say I'm shocked to hear that students appreciated the brevity of the new design either. So thank you for that. And then Natalia, we will go ahead and move to you now. So you were one of the first people on earth to take the full-length digital SAT. So that's a pretty big claim to fame there. How did your experience taking the digital version compared to the original? And then what were some benefits from the new online format that you noticed?
Okay, so first off, I just want to thank everyone. I'm so glad to include a student perspective, and I'm so glad to be here and discuss this topic. So some background information first. So before taking the digital SAT pilot, I took a pre-SAT at the start of my junior year. And I just remember just feeling very, very stressed and disorganized. I remember my calculator not being too good. It was pretty broken. It was an old calculator that I had to use, but it fit under the criteria of what College Board wanted us to bring. And I remember some students, they couldn't even bring their calculators because they had no other calculators. No one could provide them calculators. And overall, they had a really hard time doing some parts of the test. And about the paper and pencil test itself, oh my, I felt like the passages were, like you said, pretty long and pretty extensive. They were based on topics that a lot of students found confusing or not really in their curriculum or in their natural like high school environment related. The math portion of the test, I remember being very wordy, a little like on the story word problem side than more on the math side. And I could say that a lot of students were very stressed about taking that paper pencil version compared to the digital version. And when I took the digital version of the SAT around November of 2021, they didn't provide it at my school this time. I had to go to a different testing location near my area. So there was a proctor there. There were students with their own personal devices. Actually, prior to going to the testing center, we were informed that we could bring our own personal devices. And I found that extra, like, I guess, detail was like very, very cool. Like it just provided something very familiar to us students. And I feel like that familiarity really gave us a bit more confidence because we had our own device and we could do, we knew what we were doing with our own device, and we could just, we knew how things work basically. And upon taking the digital SAT, I was so surprised to see that the passages were like a fourth like of the length long than the paper pencil version. There was only like a good paragraph long. I remember being like actually like after reading a long passages, I would feel very tired. I would just not want to go on to the next question. But with this one and with different topics and a shorter time answering the questions, I felt very like I just very like up to it. Like I was ready to answer the next question, the next question, the next question. And I felt as though it went a lot faster. And in fact, it did. It only took 2 hours compared to the other 3 hours that we had to take. And I found that students enjoyed it a lot more, not only because it was very familiar to them, but because of the way the test was designed and to, I guess, administer the same results as if we took the paper and pencil version. So, yeah.
Great. So it almost sounds like there was an increased comfortability with this version of the exam, so, or the assessment rather. So thank you for that reflection. So great to have the student perspective here. And Aditi, turning back to you. So you've tested this with more than 30,000 students so far, I believe. So what else are you hearing from students and educators about the experience that you can offer to our audience?
Yeah, I'd love to share. And I want to say first, like hearing Natalia firsthand describe it is so powerful because as you said, we've tested with over 30,000 students. You know, we have a lot of overall aggregate data, but can never match the individual stories and the accounts of the feelings that a student experiences in that testing room. And so thank you for that, Natalia. And I'm actually happy to share that our overall data is reflective of some of the same themes that Natalia mentioned. You know, yes, we've conducted a lot of research studies and pilots over the last couple of years, and we've been really intentional about gathering feedback and with surveys after each of those tests. And we've been really working to get feedback from a wide range of students, including those who are testing with accommodations and those who are English language learners. And the themes that Natalia mentioned are consistent across all of those subgroups. And a few things that I'll share in terms of data points that I think have been very reassuring to us. First, more than 80% of pilot students have said that the test experience, the digital SAT testing experience was better than the paper and pencil, which is exactly what you just heard. Nearly 90% of proctors, and this is really important, and this I think speaks to some of what Paula was sharing, 90% of proctors from those digital pilots have said that they had a better experience with the digital administration than with the paper pencil and administration. And you know, I want to note that this new digital SAT being launched on our Blue Book platform is different from the digital SAT I know that Paula has been administering for a couple of years now and is further improves upon. So even that has some benefits, and this further improves upon some of those features with the external platform, the Cambium platform that we used to use. And that's where we're getting these very high marks from proctors. And lastly, 98% of pilot students said that this Blue Book app was very easy to use, which was really huge.
Thank you. I think that speaks to the accessibility piece again. So I appreciate that reflection as well. Thank you, Aditi. And then turning back to Paula. So as an educator, as an administrator, what do you see as opportunities for students coming out of this shift to the digital version of the SAT?
I think the playing field has leveled, and I think that it is really helpful that all students, they're very familiar with using computer systems. They're very familiar with testing online now. And I think it's important that we see that. I'm not showing on the screen. I don't know if we're having an issue, just I point that up. So I think that it's the quick return will also be really important. They often, even with the former digital version that we've been using, it was still a couple months before we got results back. And I think that's pretty frustrating to students, especially if they're retaking them and they want to know where they're at so they can start applying for colleges. And I also think that the shorter passages will be really helpful to students, especially if reading is not their forte and although it's now it was side by side on the computer screen, it was still a back and forth and back and forth. So being able to answer one question for each passage is going to be popular. And the students that did the pilot for me, they said that as well. They said, oh, we don't have to go back and forth and back and forth. And which line was it they were talking about, and things of that nature. And I think too, those students who are not college bound, but still would like to be taking it, or in the case, like in New Hampshire, where it's required of them, they see more value in it to themselves when they can see that they're going to be able to use this information that they receive about themselves, and it's not necessarily just for the college bound student.
Great, thank you. Definitely sounds like it's an overall student positive experience. So hopefully that will lead them to their next steps in a more efficient way as well. Natalia, so back to you and kind of the student perspective here. During the break of this exam, what did you hear other students talking about, or just kind of after the exam, any reflections from your peers that you could share with our audience?
Okay. So if you bring like a lot of students from a lot of different places to like one school, there wasn't a lot of chatter per se, but there were a lot of students, like I guess, talking about how the test was like kind of built in general. Like, for example, I heard a lot of students really love the calculator inside in the test. And also, I believe the calculator, I think it's part of Desmos, I believe. So they had an easier time I guess, working the calculator, and they had familiarity with that. And a lot of students really like that. And they also liked how they can like hide and the timer, because I know in my classroom, there's a big timer right in front of us counting down. And I know a lot of students that makes them very stressed looking up and seeing that they have like maybe 2 minutes left and they're just kind of rushing. But with this built-in timer, a lot of students can either show it or they can hide it to whatever their preference is. And I know some students were talking about how they got there, how they got to the, how they end up taking the digital version. And a lot of students, I think there was like a compensation of like, you know, there was compensation involved. And so students were there mostly on that. But they were also talking about having more practice with the SAT. They were talking about how this test would kind of help them, I guess, review more for the SAT. And I thought that was really cool because not only are you there for the, I guess, benefits, you're also there for the experience for getting more practice in for your SAT. And I believe that is kind of like, you know, it kind of like gives out like the same I guess SAT experience that you would get from the paper pencil version. And also a lot of my friends too, when they heard about it afterwards, they were really bummed out to hear that the test would be administered like after they graduated, like they wouldn't be able to take the digital SAT because they would already graduate, they would already take the paper pencil version. But I know a lot of the freshmen and sophomores in my school are really excited for the administration of the digital SAT test, and they're just really excited and really hopeful.
Well, that's great. I'm not sure that assessment envy was a thing when I was in high school, so that's great to hear. Thank you for your reflection there, Natalia. And Aldidi, we will turn back to you now. And so we're talking about equity, right? And that's obviously a focus of this work. So how will the digital version of the SAT make this experience more equitable for all students?
Yeah, you know, I want to build on a few things that Natalia and Paula have already talked about, which is there are aspects of the design and the features. For instance, Natalia spoke so powerfully to the availability of the calculator and how that plays to equity versus before, where students had to bring a calculator and may not have had the right calculator. And so that's a great example of how we've built built and designed the new digital SAT with equity at the center. I think to add to the things those two have mentioned, I will add that there are a couple of key ways we've thought about equity and how the new digital SAT will be a better, more equitable experience for students. So first, the digital SAT suite will be more secure. That was a big driver of how we thought about the design of and why we needed to design the digital SAT. So think about what happens now. And Paul actually spoke to this about receiving your box full of paper tests. So right now, if one test form is compromised, it can mean now canceling scores for a whole group of students. Going digital allows us to give every student a unique test form. So it becomes practically impossible to share answers across students. And that's huge for the vast, vast majority of students who are showing up on test day prepared to do their best work. And we want them to have that opportunity and not get their scores canceled because of bad behavior on the part of a very, very, very small number. So that security is a huge benefit for equity and fairness for students. The other benefit is flexibility. So going digital means that we're going to be able to offer more flexibility for when and how often schools can administer the SAT. So because it's not about getting that box of fixed forms and having very, very careful protocols for how to handle them securely, because those constraints will no longer be there, because we'll be able to offer unique test forms, we're also going to be able to offer a lot more flexibility in when and how frequently schools are able to test. And that's going to be very valuable for expanding access to SAT School Day, which is a huge driver of equity and access in and of itself. So security and flexibility, both of these speak to equity and also to ease and are very important to how we're thinking about the digital SAT. But I want to add that the other piece of that is access to technology. And that's another important piece of how we're thinking about equity in terms of the digital SAT. So making sure that technology or lack of access to technology is not an impediment for students taking the digital SAT. So first, in terms of the testing application itself, we have built the testing application to withstand internet outages. So students actually won't have to be connected to the internet for the entire testing time. If the internet disconnects while they're taking the test, they can continue as usual taking the test without disruption. If their computer runs out of battery during the test and shuts down, they can plug in, restart their device and pick up where they left off, and all of their work will have been saved and they will not have lost testing time. So those are we know that things like internet access and connectivity are important concerns. And so from the very beginning, we've built with that in mind. And it's been one of the goals of all of the pilots we've done to really ensure that we're continuing to refine around that. And then lastly, I mentioned before, we're adding flexibility around devices. Students will be able to use their own device, a school-issued device, and for weekend testing, if students don't have a device to use, they can request to borrow one to use on test day.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing those features. And I think this is actually a great segue into the Q&A portion of this session. So Paula talked about how the digital SAT is now more applicable to non-college bound students by including career readiness information. So Aditi, I would like to ask you a follow-up question. Can you tell us a bit more about this feature and how it will affect students' access to the non-college bound population?
Sure. I mean, we know that there are a lot of different pathways to college, and not every student is thinking about college right out the gate, but we know that careers can be a huge driver and motivator for how students think about their post-secondary experiences. So as part of our new Big Future program, we actually have included career planning, career exploration and planning as part of Big Future. We've partnered with Jobs for the Future, and we've done a lot of work to map the skills, the same skills that show up on the SAT, that test for career and college readiness, to map those to jobs and potential careers. And so when a student sees their score report, regardless of what score they saw, they're going to get a lot of value in seeing, based on how you perform, here are some jobs that you show readiness for. Here are some jobs and potential careers that you show readiness for. And then they have the opportunity to go to Big Future, learn more about those careers, learn more about what it might take to become prepared for those careers. And so it's a really nice way to show that all students can benefit from the information, the very important information that they'll get from participating in and taking the SAT.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aditi. And then Natalia, from a student perspective, were you able to access this feature on the exam, on the assessment? And if so, what was your experience with the career readiness feature?
I believe our teachers also helped us use this career ready feature. I don't remember exactly how I think it worked exactly, so I can't really speak too much about it. But I know for a lot of other students, it really helps them based on what they want for the future. And I like how Didi said that everyone's paths are different, so it's good to have like that broad kind of like perspective and have some guidance to help you.
Absolutely. And I think I would also like to get your perspective on just what general advice do you have for other students as they prepare for the new format of this assessment and for their futures as well?
For other students, I would suggest, if they want to study, they should. If they want to include, I know some colleges are going test optional, and the students wish to submit their scores, or if they do not wish to submit their scores, that is on them. But if they have something, if they want to show, or sorry, if they want to take it and they feel like they can do good on it, they feel like they can do well on it, they should just go ahead and take it, study as normally. It's for everyone. It's all inclusive. I believe all students should have the chance to take the SAT, whether they may be good at it or not. As long as they try, they're good. So.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm sure the students listening in now or later would appreciate that advice as well. So thank you. And Paula, just from an assessment lens here, I kind of want to get your thoughts on how can we be sure these changes to the SAT won't impact how the test assesses achievement or how students are reflecting on their results. So do you have any insight on that?
Sure. I think the scores coming back faster will have a huge impact. And because right now it's, with the several weeks to several months in some cases later, it's also harder for their counselors, for their administrators to work with them on what the process should be. So if they want to be able to retake the test, say in September or October, they often don't get the results in time for the colleges. Though colleges certainly understand that, they definitely want to be able to know, okay, now that I have these new scores, I maybe use Khan Academy to study better, all of these pieces that hopefully when the scores go up, their opportunities have changed. I would point out, get your IT department on board fast. And that helped us prevent any issues with connectivity. We found one classroom that we will never use again for digital testing. So it was good to know that in advance. And they were able to help the students too. If they, we happen to be a one-to-one school, but helping students who were joining us because they were homeschooled or joining us from another school district to be able to have access in our school. And make sure that the guest access and things are up to date so that all students feel good about it and they're not worried about, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? And I can tell you too that I had students who did both the paper and pencil and the digital pilot. And I think it is, they said in their surveys that it was so much better that they could really felt more like they could go at their own pace. That they certainly have it's certainly time. And as Natalia said, there is that, that countdown up there. They also appreciated that it came back at 5 minutes to let them know they had 5 minutes left, 5 minutes left to go. And they didn't feel panicked about that. They could put it away for a while and just work. But I really think that this is going to be helpful to students from all areas. We're a very rural school and had so this digital piece really came into play during the pandemic and remote learning, and they were happy that it could continue as something like the SATs.
I appreciate that. And thank you for highlighting the environment matters, certainly, and that schools need to take kind of all of these conditional factors into account as well. And then Paula, we're going to go back to you in a minute, but Aditi, I wanted to get your perspective on the value of what's called SAT School Day before going back to Paula for her reflection on that as well.
Yeah, and I love to talk about this in the context of what Paula has been sharing, because I think it's so important to remember that the majority of our test takers now, of SAT takers, test during the school day. So, we see every year an increasing number of our SAT takers participated in SAT School Day. It's a huge driver of access. I was recently at our annual meeting of College Board members and had a chance to have really powerful conversations with superintendents and school leaders talking about how valuable it is that now, instead of only certain students going on Saturday to take the SAT, it's all students. It speaks to what Natalia was talking about before, that you never know, and it might actually open your eyes to strengths that you have that could position you well for college. It can be very powerful for career readiness once we add that feature to our score reports. We don't offer that yet, but we will be adding that in the future, and that's going to be a huge benefit as well. So that SAT School Day and in making testing easier in the context of SAT School Day was a really important reason that we did this, and I think a really important reason that we continue to listen to the experiences that educators are having about the ease and flexibility. So I'd love, and I would love for Paula to add to that too, and to understand more of how SAT School Day has benefited her district, because it's certainly one of the big reasons we do what we do.
Thank you, Aditi. SAT School Day has been helpful to our students. We send them to their advisory rooms so they know exactly where to go. And on PSAT Day, as we called it in October, we had 9, 10, 11, and 12 all testing. So it was an interesting challenge, but they went straight to their advisory room. This is a room that they are in every day. This is a room that with a teacher that they know, and we did run into issues with teachers having their own child taking it on the same day. We made them a hall monitor really fast, but so you have to watch out for those things. The more proctors you have, the more issues you have to look into with that. But they were the students felt comfortable. The snacks were something they recognized. They didn't have to bring snacks. We provided it. We had, our school counselors were heavily involved. They were able to spend some time with students ahead of time, talking about anxiety of testing. And they were able to be there for students who might have some test anxiety the day of. We were able to control the technology piece of it and make sure we had all of the computers collected, recharged, ready to go. So we weren't dependent on a student computer not working. And we tested them all in advance. And being able to sign in ahead of time and be able to to sign up for the test right in the same environment. They had a practice test that they had one question from each section, And we did all of that in their advisory. So they were very comfortable come test day. And the accommodated testing, they were in a different space, but with the computerized testing, there's many fewer accommodations. And it used to be that if you had like text to speech, it was double the time, and that got down to time and a half. So they could be in the same room with students doing it, whether they were listening to it or they were taking it without it being read to them. So I think it just made a much smoother process all the way around. And students really appreciated not having, especially during the pandemic, not having to go to another school to test.
So I'm hearing that familiarity can make a huge difference. So thank you for that. Aditi, I did want to get back to you to ask, just for not really forecasting here, but how do you think the use of the digital assessment will be received by higher ed organizations, scholarship organizations? How do you think they will be adapting to this shift?
Yeah, well, I will say, as I mentioned before, we've been doing a lot of research over the last couple of years. And one of the big reasons for that is to confirm that the digital SAT scores can be used in the same way as scores from the current paper and pencil test. And all of our research confirms that. We have been communicating regularly with higher ed and our members and scholarship organizations about that. And they will continue to use digital SAT scores the very same way that they have been using paper and pencil scores. And they've been great in providing input to us along the way about what's valuable to them and important to them in order to ensure that they can do so. And that's what we've been focused on in terms of a lot of the research we've done. And that's really great news for students in terms of the scholarship organizations. Again, hundreds of scholarships that are given based on digital SAT. And so, yes, we're really expecting no change at all in how the scores are used. And in fact, I will say that because we've had over 30,000 students test, we've actually had a number of our research studies that students have been able to earn reportable scores from. And we will have, by the end of this fall, over 18,000 students will have been eligible to actually report their scores to colleges from, and again, whether they do or not will be their choice, to Natalia's earlier point, that over 18,000 scores will have been earnable by the end of this fall. So we're really excited about that.
Well, great. Thank you for those updates and predictions as well there. So Natalia, I do want to turn back to you. Is there any other commentary or reflection you can offer about your experience, especially as international students around the world are going to begin to dive into this new version of the assessment very soon?
Yeah, I just feel like this digital version of the SAT will be so much more inclusive and equitable for everyone. It provides features that students can use, and students won't have to bring their own things that may not be up to par with other students'. I guess things, calculators, for example, it'll all be just here on the computer screen, ready to use. And a lot of things are also pretty adaptable as well. I feel like this is a good change also because we're also moving to a more technology-based world. And I feel like students are, again, familiar with that technology. And I feel like they're a lot more comfortable, and it creates that sense of confidence in them. And that's something that a lot of students value and appreciate.
Well, great. Thank you for that. Certainly during COVID times with everything going digital kind of at once here, it was sort of a very opportune time for these changes. So sounds like that was your experience as well. And then Paula, I'm sure there are plenty of policymakers on this call. So do you have any reflection to offer to policymakers as they kind of consider the assessment landscape and especially in the post-secondary world, do you have any advice as they do their jobs out in the legislatures?
I think it's really helpful if they have the ability to provide funding for infrastructure. I know we did much better with that during the pandemic. I don't want to lose that. and it's very helpful that College Board provided some technology as well. But I think the infrastructures, particularly in states that are more rural, it is very possible any given day that the infrastructure goes down. And so it's important to, although once you get started, it definitely, you don't need that, if the internet goes down for a bit, it's okay. You still need it to get going. And, and at the end to sort of submit everything. It's not unusual if there's a snowstorm or if there is, a windy day that that infrastructure may not stay up. So I think that's one thing that policymakers could look at. I think too, that as colleges are making decisions, as was alluded to about test optional, that they should consider the equity in a digital test. And, I'm, as a former school counselor, I am always happy when a student can make those choices, not based on their test scores. But I'm hoping that with the equity, that those test scores will be more equitable as well. And then the colleges can see it on an even playing field.
Well, thank you for that. And I think I would like to do around to follow that up with just kind of what gives you hope about all these institutions and policymakers, each of you, I should say, hope about how they're responding to technological advances, specifically in this area, but more broadly in secondary and post-secondary education as well. So starting with you, Aditi, what gives you hope in this sphere?
Well, I think, I'll say, as Paula mentioned, the pandemic really did shine a light on the need for bridging the digital divide. And we know that there are a lot of policymakers, funders. We worked with partners during the pandemic and continue to do so to ensure that that digital divide is further and further narrowed. So I'm hopeful that just like the pandemic shined a light on a lot of things, that's something that it really has shown as both a need and an opportunity. And the fact that we've been able to use this as this launching point to create a testing platform that addresses the reality. I mean, the fact is, look, it happens to all of us. We spend our day on Zoom meetings and whatnot, and then there's a blip, the signal drops, and we know that that's going to happen. And so we've created a platform that withstands those. And in fact, it even allows, when the test completes, if you still haven't reconnected, there's even some time afterwards to be able to upload the finished exam. So we've been able to build with those realities in mind, but we still want all of those gaps to be minimized. And so, but I'm very hopeful that this is something, because it's not just for testing, it's for learning, all of the ways that educators at schools like Paula's and Natalia's rely on digital technology infrastructure to deliver learning, deliver tools for teachers and students. It's so much the fabric of how school works now that itself makes me optimistic that we're going to see, for years it was very slow, the move toward bridging that divide, and that there's an acceleration that's come about because of that.
Thank you for that. I would agree, certainly an opportune time for these changes to come to life. So Paula, can we shift to you now for your reflection on the hope?
So I hope it continues to be equitable for all students, but also that the higher education system doesn't lose what they gained in the pandemic from digital classes and the opportunity to be in person or online. And I think as as they look at students and what the last 3 years have done to their education, to see that we have this test now that can really look at where are students at, and maybe the colleges can see the whole picture as well. We look at students in our schools having and I'm sure Natalia will attest to this too, that, ninth graders who haven't had a full year of school since sixth grade, and that's just going to follow through. But I am hopeful that we are on the other side of all of this. I cross your fingers, and that, but we can take the positive pieces from that. And one of those positive pieces, of course, is the digital testing, but also that colleges and other higher education, technical schools, et cetera, have more ability than they had before, and can also look at this as a way to equalize.
Certainly appreciate you uplifting the access and equity piece to this work. So thank you, Paula. And Natalia, can you talk to us a little bit about your reflections on your hope now that these changes have been rolled out and embraced and are going to be hopefully increasing access and equity around the world? And then also, I'm sure our audience would love to know, and I would love to know here at the Hunt Institute, what are your plans for the future now that you have navigated this new version of the assessment?
To answer the first question, I just hope that now with these new things rolling out, post-pandemic, fingers crossed, I hope that all students have the chance to, again, be included in this digital world, and also, like Dee said, I guess minimize the distance between, like, the digital, I guess, gap between students. Most students already have their devices. I know there's a couple of students who may not have a device, but the school, hopefully schools will be able to accommodate for that. And my hope is that all students will be able to indulge in this new digital world that we're going into. And I also, to answer the other question, for in the future for me, I wish to major in kinesiology and medicine, and I hope that with this career path, I will be taking the right steps to go into this field. And I mean, to all the students who are watching, I just hope you guys also can pursue what you want, and also just be included in this new digital thing. I'm sure everyone has a computer, or has a device at home. And so I'm glad this is promoting that, I guess, connectivity we have digitally and online. So, yeah.
Well, those are exciting plans, and I'm glad that you'll have this story to share with your college peers in the near future about you being amongst the first to enjoy this new version of the assessment. So thank you, Natalia. Always great to have the student perspective. Aldini, we actually did have a question come in. I was curious if you could tell us a little bit more before I go into closing remarks about the decision-making behind rolling this out internationally before kind of bringing it to the US.
Sure. Yeah. One of the huge benefits, and one thing we're really excited about with rolling it out internationally first, is that we're now able to offer 2 additional international administrations, which has long been a request for those who are testing our international test centers and those who are testing internationally, and we just haven't been able to do it. I spoke earlier about the limitations of paper forms and the fact that moving to digital gives us more flexibility, and adding new administrations. Over time, we hope to be able to add more, even more administrations, both in the US and internationally. But right out of the gate, we're able to do that by launching internationally in 2023. So that was a big goal that we're really excited about, and it was a big piece of the rationale. And of course, I spoke earlier about the test security goal, that was one of the reasons we did this. Test security has long been a particular concern for some of our international test takers, and so fairness to all of our international test centers and test takers, it made it a priority that we roll out the digital SAT to our international students first. So we're excited about that, and we've been piloting with international students and international test centers across the world for the last year or so. And we have a lot of test centers on board. We're looking to add more so that flexibility and access can continue to be a benefit to international test takers.
Wonderful. Thank you for addressing that question. And thanks so much to the three of you for your thoughtful reflections throughout today's session. So we at the Hunt Institute are so excited for the intentional work that you are doing to continue making the SAT more equitable and respond to the needs of students, of course, the focus of all of our work. So I know that we, along with all of our audience members, are excited to see how this digital version of the assessment continues to help students prepare for college and for their careers as well, and how it sparks innovation in technology and in post-secondary education. So I do want to thank all of our audience members again for joining us for this conversation. I hope you'll consider joining us on November 10th. Do a plug for our next webinar here titled Creating Avenues to Workforce Advancement. So we'll have a great set of panelists for that webinar as well. We look forward to the conversation, of course. So again, thank you to Aditi and the whole College Board team. They really had a tremendous effort in making today's webinar possible, and we always enjoy the partnership. So thank you all so much for that. As well as Paula, thank you for offering your unique perspective here today as well. And then Natalia, as I said, can't thank you enough for offering the student perspective today. And we wish you nothing but the best moving forward in your next steps. So we will see you all next month for the next webinar, and take care in the meantime. Thanks so much.